Welcome, everyone. I'm Cynthia Lazaroff, and I welcome you all from the island of Kauai with gratitude beneath the mountain Kalalea, sacred to the Hawaiian people, the original stewards of this land. I want to thank all of you who are joining us from across many time zones around the world for our very special program, Women of the World Call for Peace Now. Thank you so much for caring and for joining us to call for peace now. We're honored and thrilled to have with us three truly remarkable women, all dedicated to peace and transforming our nuclear legacy. Nobel Peace Laureate Mairead Maguire, Ambassador Elaine Whyte Gomez, and Dr. Paula Garb. And I'm so grateful to our co-sponsors for their generous support in making our program possible. The Center for Citizen Peacebuilding at UC Irvine and the Center for Peacemaking Practice at the Jimmy and Rosalynn Carter School for Peace and Conflict Resolution at George Mason University. If you have a question, please type it into the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. After we hear from our speakers, we'll open up our discussion to the Q&A, and we'll do our best to answer as many of your questions as possible. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties, please also type those in the Q&A, where our Zoom specialist, Amel, will be monitoring and be happy to help you out. Our program today was born out of an American-Russian Women's Dialogue and Peacebuilding initiative we co-founded with our Russian sisters just over a year ago. At the time, we never imagined we would be where we are today, following the devastating invasion and war in Ukraine. When we started, our goals included improving US-Russia relations, reducing tensions, averting an unthinkable nuclear war, and as women from the two countries, which still possessed over 90% of the world's nuclear weapons, working together for disarmament and the elimination of nuclear weapons. These are not small goals, and we had no illusions about the formidable obstacles in the way of achieving them. But facing existential stakes, the end of life as we know it, of everything and everyone we know and love on this earth, we felt compelled to try. Over the past year, we wrote a series of open letters that were published in both countries calling for peace and ending the threat of nuclear war. Our last open letter was published the week before the Russian invasion, and in it, we stood together with our Ukrainian sisters calling for peace. We had planned to invite the public to join our group this year, but the war changed everything and has made this impossible. Due to ongoing repression in Russia for any anti-war activity and making it a crime to even speak the words war or invasion, our Russian sisters have not been meeting with us. But we know they stand with us and are committed to renewing our collaboration after the war comes to an end. We American women have continued meeting and have issued an appeal for peace in Ukraine, calling for an immediate ceasefire to stop the killing, bloodshed, and immense human suffering, to resolve this conflict through dialogue and diplomacy, and to end the increasing threat of escalation to nuclear war. Our work is harder now, but we believe it is more important than ever, which is why we are convening this gathering with you all today. We're heartbroken by the war in Ukraine and by the many wars tearing families and countries apart around the world. As we will hear from our speakers today, war is deeply personal, and the official war casualty statistics don't begin to reflect the enormity of the numbers of people impacted by war. Countless millions, so many, many women, men, and children. It's just 2 days after we celebrate Mother's Day in the United States, and we convene this program in the spirit of the original inspiration for Mother's Day before the commercialization and the Hallmark cards. Haunted by the mass carnage and trauma they witnessed during the American Civil War, Ann Jarvis and Julia Howe became peace activists and called for the creation of a Mother's Day for Peace. Howe appealed to women around the world and said, "We women of one country will be too tender of those of another country to allow our sons to be trained to injure theirs." The modern day version is, "I will not raise my child to kill another mother's child." Howe went on to become a suffragette with a conviction that women must make their voices heard and claim their rightful equal place in politics to create a more peaceful and just world. With all the progress that's been made, women remain significantly underrepresented in national security, negotiations, and peace processes. And yet when women in civil society are involved, the research shows peace becomes more possible and peace agreements more enduring. Today, it's an existential imperative that women come forward to lead the way to peace and the abolition of nuclear weapons. Excluding women, half of the human race, for much of the nuclear age, has brought us to the brink of possible extinction. With that, I'd like to welcome our extraordinary speakers. These women are all changing the game, all leading in new ways, all showing us a pathway forward to peace and disarmament. I want to begin by welcoming Mairead Corrigan Maguire. Mairead Corrigan Maguire, welcome Mairead, is a Nobel Peace Laureate and co-founder of Peacepeople Northern Ireland. Mairead was the aunt of 3 Maguire children who died as a result of being hit by an Irish Republican Army getaway car after its driver was shot by a British soldier. She responded to the violence facing her family and community by organizing massive peace demonstrations, appealing for an end to the bloodshed and a nonviolent solution to the conflict. Mairead was awarded the 1976 Nobel Peace Prize for her courageous efforts in co-founding a movement to help bring about peace and end the violence arising out of the ethnic political conflict in Northern Ireland. After receiving the reward, she has since dedicated her life to promoting peace and disarmament, both in Northern Ireland and around the world. Welcome, Mairead. We're so deeply honored to have you with us.
Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
So I want to begin. My first question to you is, in 1976, your life changed forever when your niece and nephews were killed during the time of troubles in Northern Ireland. In the days following the tragedy, you co-founded a movement for a peaceful resolution of the conflict that grew to over 100,000 people. The violence was reduced by 70%, and you and your co-founder, Betty Williams, were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize later that year. We would be so honored for you to take us back to 1976 and to share your personal story and journey for peace in Northern Ireland.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. It's a great pleasure for me to be with you all and an honor to share the platform with our fellow guests. Peace is not easy. It's easier to go to war because, well, you can take a gun and go to war. But to say, no, I won't kill another human being, and no matter what our differences are, we can work it out. We can talk about this. Might take us a long time to solve our problems, but we really can do it. So I think peace needs a passion and a belief and an absolute conviction that peace is possible and peace works. So whenever my sister's 3 children were killed, she herself was dangerously ill, and she went on to have 2 more little children, but she never got over the broken heart of losing her 3 children, and she took her own life. And you know, when we talk about war, we talk about the things being destroyed, people losing their homes, having to flee, which is horrific. But we also need to remember that people who are caught up in war are absolutely traumatized. They lose everything, and often they're badly injured and hurt, and they do not survive. You know, like Anne did not survive. She died of a broken heart because she missed 2 children so much. You know, so whenever I look at what's happening in the Ukraine, and I think so many thousands and thousands and thousands of people will not survive because they've lost somebody they love. They have lost their homes, which have been demolished, destroyed. They've had to flee to strange countries and start again with broken hearts. I mean, you cannot begin to measure the human suffering in that. It's enormous. So we have to say to ourselves, how do we stop this violence of war, nuclear weapons? How do we stop this madness? Because it is madness. I mean, we don't have to live like this. So I think we start by recognizing violence is always wrong. And there's no use us looking and blaming others on it, or demonizing people, or dehumanizing them, or talking that like as if we can kill them. We can build weapons and we can go out and destroy another people's land. You know, it's just so absolutely dreadful. So I think we need to have a very clear voice. Violence, whether it comes from our governments, or whether it comes from armed struggles, or whether it comes from poverty, or whether it comes from the destruction of the environment, or whether it comes from economic sanctions put on where we destroy the lives of millions of people. I mean, that is violence. That is not acceptable. And I'm very, very conscious of the fact I was in Iraq before the war started, and there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And the Iraqi government was pleading for dialogue, but they didn't get dialogue. They got sanctions that crucified their people, little children dying in hospitals, and I stood by their beds with no medicine, with no doctors, with no hospitals, and they justified that. And today we continue in that trend with such arrogance, saying sanctions will work. What are we doing to each other? To put sanctions on against the Russian people, who will pay the price dearly in their ordinary lives of sanctions, and many of us who will pay the price in Europe because of these sanctions. It doesn't make sense where we are destroying economies right across Europe because we will pay the price by putting on sanctions and stopping basic things that people here in Belfast. There are women in Belfast who don't have enough money to both feed their children and put on heating. This is an allegedly civilized country. You see, we really have got to have some grown-up thinking in dealing with our world problems, because what we have got is a lot of immature nonsense people talking ridiculous solutions to what are deep human suffering. Now, for me in Northern Ireland, we were at a crossroads. If we'd have continued in 76 with our armed struggle and our paramilitary groups and youngsters running around with guns, killing people, and governments sending in armies which were misbehaving and removing basic human rights and laws, if we did not stand up then and say, stop this violence, sit down around a table, all inclusive, unconditional talks, and sort this problem out. Well, that took a long time to come about, but it happened because many, many people, particularly women, but there were men in our movement also, said no more violence. We want to sort this problem out. People will be glad to hear that we have had our elections and we are still at the table. So at least we're dealing with our problems without killing each other. Now, we are a deeply divided ethnic political conflict here. Conflicts have histories. They don't happen overnight. Men from Mars don't come down with guns and start violence. Every conflict has its roots. And what we need to do, if we're to solve these conflicts, look at the root of the violence and try to solve it. Now, for people who will look to Russia, and I was in Russia many years ago, and I've been to America over 100 times. If we look at the root of what happened in the Ukraine and in Russia, if we had had wise leadership who had not self-interests in violence and war and weapons, they could easily have solved the problem of Russia and the Ukraine. It could have been done. But unfortunately, and I do not condone by any means as a pacifist, what happened when Russia went into Ukraine. I don't condone that. And the bombing of buildings and people having to flee in their thousands, I do not condone that. But what I say is, where are the men and women of wisdom who knew how to solve the problems of the Donbass and the violence that was going on in the Ukraine? Where were the wise men who said to NATO, why are you putting your NATO bases right around Russia? Every ex-Soviet state has now got a US NATO base and pointing their nuclear weapons at Russia. Why? Russia promised, America promised Gorbachev that if the Soviet Union moved for change and Germany became united, they would not put NATO bases in ex-Soviet states. They broke their word. They never kept their word. So I believe that NATO is not a peacemaking organization. It is a military organization, and it's determined to build its bases around the world. So when they're finished with destroying Ukraine, because NATO was behind all this, when they're finished with destroying Ukraine, do they move on to China? The US military industrial complex and NATO are the only people who are making money out of arms and weapons, while people are hungry and fleeing their homes in their millions. We have got to abolish NATO, and we have got to build institutions and structures right across Europe and the world that reflect our human dignity, our equality, that are just. So I believe abolishing NATO is an urgent thing for us. Abolishing militarism and war and armed conflicts and killing and torturing each other. We need the United Nations to be more active, louder, and to be reformed. And we need to acknowledge it as the best we have now with being reformed and helping us as a human family deal with the problems. If Russia and America and China, instead of spending all their money on weapons and war while people are starving, because we children die every day of poverty, starving, we spend all the money on weapons and war, instead of spending their money on weapons and war, decided to deal with poverty. We could remove poverty in a couple of weeks. We could deal with the climate issue. The world is falling apart, and we are allowing our governments in our name to destroy it. So I challenge Biden and all the American elite, and I challenge Russia and China, start dealing with the human issues. It's all about humanity. So we have to join together. Thank you for your great work. Thank you for bringing together the Russian and the American women. Good on you, keep it up. It's the only way to build peace. There is no way but human relationships and is respecting our humanity, not demonizing each other, but humanizing each other. And as Martin Luther King said, the choices between violence and non-violence. If we keep on the road of militarizing Europe, which is what we're doing, if we keep militarizing Europe, if we keep trying to get NATO into Ireland now, they're trying to say that we don't have Irish neutrality. Ireland was never a military country, ever. And we must uphold our neutrality together with other countries and say that as neutral people, people for peace, not for war, that we will stand up for peace against the militarization of Europe. So thank you for what you're doing. And the only way to do it is to talk to each other.
Mairead, thank you for all those very wise words from your heart and your experience in this conflict, and for sharing what's in your heart with us, and giving us, it's really about humanity and how do we stop this violence, wherever it is, all kinds of violence. Thank you so much. I want to move on to my next question for you, which is, you co-founded your movement with Betty Williams, and most of the members of your movement were women, and you first called yourselves Women for Peace. And you've since participated in many women's peace delegations around the world. And you've said the only time ever available for making peace is now, and now is the time for all of us to play our part. This brings to mind, if not us, who? If not now, when? Why is the participation of women so critical to successful peace building? And why is it imperative, especially at this time, that women come forward to claim their seats at the table to build peace in our communities, in our countries, in our world? And what are your recommendations? What concrete steps can we take now to start building peace?
Well, I think that everybody can build peace. We can all do something for peace, because it starts in the home and it starts in the community. So we can all be peacemakers. And one of the great things that I think women are good at recognizing the things that are needed. I mean, women together here in Northern Ireland, they sat at the peace table when the Good Friday Agreement was being drawn up, and a great group of women. And what they brought to that was the basic things like the cost of living, like healthcare, education, like the prisoners. And they insisted on all-inclusive, unconditional talking. And when anybody was excluded from the negotiating table, the women insisted on them being brought in. There were no enemies. We were in this thing together, and we were all part of building it together. So I think all-inclusive, unconditional, no marginalizing people. And when we started in Northern Ireland, it was the first time women had there wasn't a political party. We started as the Peace People. We said we are here to encourage the parties to talk. We're the paper in the middle if you want to bring together the parties. And it worked because women were able to go out and just cross the divide and have a cup of tea and talk to each other on very basic grounds. We were not academics coming with any great theories. We were just saying, look, we're human beings and we've got a problem. Let's sort it out together. Let's respect each other. So peace movements, grassroots movements are very, very important. And I was privileged to go to North Korea with the 30 women across the DMZ. And it was the most wonderful experience, because what we found there was we went via China into North Korea, and thousands of North Korean women marched for peace. And we went down and we crossed into South Korea, and thousands of people marched for peace. And we came out saying, look, peace is possible. Why do we have these people sitting in offices and saying, oh, the people of North Korea don't want to talk to each other, I don't want nuclear weapons? Rubbish. People wanted peace. But what was happening? There's never been genuine dialogue there in order to help the people of North and South Korea come together. Now, that's not good enough, because people in North Korea who have family in the South of Korea, they're getting old and they want to see their family. Now, why is that allowed to happen? And why are we sending nuclear warships to surround China? China is not our enemy. China is our friend. And we need to say, no more of this gunboat diplomacy. And I'm ashamed of the British government, because instead of helping the Ukrainians and the Russians make peace, they're demonizing Russia. Do you know, they have made the Russian people feel like they've no right to be here. And I apologize to the Russian people on how they're being treated by the West. And we're sending them billions of pounds to Ukraine, and we're sending them weapons that blow apart young soldiers. You know, we've created such inhumanity, and we're justifying it. And there's no justification for this kind of weaponry. And I am ashamed to say, and I ask the forgiveness of the people who die at the end of weapons, laser weapons. And do you know where some of them come from? Belfast. We have an arms factory in Belfast making weapons that are sold to the British government, that are going to the Ukraine, that are used to kill young soldiers. Now, I'm ashamed of that. So the arms trade is a disgrace. And you know, we also have, people might know, Shannon Airport has been used since every one of these wars started. The Iraqi war, the Afghani war, the Libyan war, Syrian war. Who started all these wars and with whose permission? The American, NATO, US, complete spectrum domination. Who gave America the authority to have complete military domination of the whole world? That if you don't do what you're told, they'll blow the hell out of you. This is absolute madness, and it's a politic that must stop. So let's get serious about saying, when we're working for peace, we know what our vision is. It's a world of non-violence, a world of peace. It's a world of genuine democracy. It's a world that's equal. It is not one ruled by militarists and arms manufacturers and people who are making millions out of children dying, because that's what's happening. Children are starving and people are making millions out of it. We've created a totally unjust world, and it's not fair. And then we ask ourselves, why do we have jihadists? Why do we have Shabbat? Why do we have these paramilitaries? We have them because we have pushed them too far into absolute poverty, destroying their countries. And then we ask, why is there so much violence in the world? The question is not why is there so much violence, but why is it not even worse because of our violent policies of destruction and cruelty and economic injustice? It's got to change, because if we keep on this road, we'll destroy the world. So I challenge particularly young people, waking up to what's happening in your world before it's too late for your children and my grandchildren.
Thank you, Mairead, for bringing this human dimension to the face of war, and also, to keep telling us that peace is possible and reminding us that people really want peace everywhere. So that wherever you go in the world, the people want peace. Thank you for that. I'm going to just ask you to go to my final question for you before the question on the round. If you could just give us maybe a short answer to, with having witnessed so much bloodshed and suffering in your own country and around the world in your efforts for peace building, where do you find inspiration and what brings you hope? How do you keep going?
I find it in people, because I meet so many good people and everybody wants to change the world. You meet young people and you ask them, what do you want? And they say, to change the world. Well, you can't change the world, but I find it in people. And I encourage, I know that this war in Ukraine, which has been horrible, it has made us feel everybody thinks now you have to have weapons in order to they attack other countries. But I would say to you, weapons never work. If you bring one gun into any situation, people will flee, because people are afraid for their life, for their children. So weapons don't work. And sending weapons into a situation with ethnic conflict like ours, like Ukraine, like so many countries, you're putting wood on the fire, but you'll raise the ethnic conflicts. You can never get Genie back into the box once the violence is out. So I would say, let's teach non-violence. Let's teach conflict resolution. Let's put money into ministries of peace. Do you know the ministries of peace are practically non-existent because they're ministries of war? So when there's a problem in the Ukraine, instead of having a ministry of peace that we can go and figure out how to help the people of the Ukraine, how do you help them? We go to the ministry of war and we send them weapons, nuclear weapons, weapons to kill each other with. We've led the world to the brink of, or we could be annihilated. And we're in a very, very, very dangerous situation. We're in an arms race and we're heading into a Cold War all over again. And this could be very dangerous because World War II and I started with very simple things. So let's not fool ourselves. We are in a highly dangerous situation. So we must call people back and ask them, be calm. Stop demonizing each other. Look at the solutions and find a way through this for all our sakes. Please do not bring us to the brink of nuclear weapons and war. Because I've been to Hiroshima and Nagasaki and I've seen what these weapons can do. And I know that we don't have a whole lot of people very wise. We have a whole lot of angry people. We have a whole lot of people extremely disturbed by what has happened. For God's sake, pull back from the brink of war. And I say to President Putin and President Biden, you are world leaders. Lead people to peace. Don't take them down the path of war.
Thank you, Mairead. May it be so. Let us go to peace, and may the wisdom be shown by our leaders to get us to peace. Your mention of teaching peace is a perfect segue to Paula, who I would like to introduce. Dr. Paula Garb next. Dr. Paula Garb is a senior fellow at the Center for Peacemaking Practice at George Mason University. For the past 28 years, Dr. Garb has facilitated citizen dialogues and taught peaceful problem-solving skills in conflict zones of the South Caucasus and to gang intervention workers in Southern California. She's also taught mediation and conflict resolution at the University of California, Irvine for 25 years. Dr. Garb serves on the board of UCI Center for Citizen Peacebuilding, which she co-founded and co-directed for 20 years. She's also published numerous books and journals on peacebuilding. So welcome, Paula. We're so delighted to have you with us. I'm so happy that you could join us today. My first question to you is getting back to this theme that we've covered with Mairead already, is that war casualty statistics do not begin to reflect the impact of war on veterans, war correspondents, humanitarian aid workers, and others after they return home, or the impact on their families and communities. You've lost your son due to the trauma of war and have been inspired to dedicate your life to peace building. So would be really honored if you would share your personal journey to peace building.
Thank you. It's really wonderful to be in everybody's company. And thank you, Cynthia, for bringing me into this wonderful group of women and all of those who are with us listening. My son, Gregory Danilenko, was 18 when he began covering wars as a TV cameraman after the USSR collapsed in the early 1990s. So he covered Chechnya, Georgia, Tajikistan, and later the collapse of the former Yugoslavia, the wars that ensued there. And finally, Iraq and Afghanistan, he went to several times for CNN. By the time he was 38, he'd been documenting with his camera the most horrific things people do to one another in war. So for the last 10 years of his life, while doing this work, his nightmares and flashbacks increased to the point where the only way he found he could sleep was to drink a pint of vodka. And he went to doctors and there was some help, but not really the help he needed. At the time, I felt like even soldiers who we have come to understand have post-traumatic stress, even they weren't getting what they needed, but at least there was an awareness and they had some. But the journalists, the documenters of war, even sign contracts with their companies that they're on their own if they die or get wounded or whatever. There's really no help coming from the people who send them into those war zones. He did manage to raise 2 wonderful children, but all the time he was dying a slow and torturous death. And it was during this period and after his final demise, which I really didn't believe was possible, but it did come. I really began to understand that those statistics don't, that the people who die those slow deaths, like our friend Mairead was telling us, we don't even count them, let alone, the people who do live a long time, but live with their nightmares, live with their traumas. And then there's that ripple effect that it has, not just on mothers, but on children, grandchildren, the trauma that gets passed on intergenerationally. My own father was a survivor of a vicious pogrom in 1919 in Russia. And he survived it as a 9-year-old with an 11-year-old brother and a 5-year-old sister. And each of those children was traumatized in different ways. My father was a very kind and gentle soul, but he didn't trust anyone outside his family. And he never wanted to achieve much because he was afraid to go out into the world. He didn't have that kind of self-confidence. And my son, the month before he died, was at my father's graveside on his knees, my son on his knees, tears flowing as he communicated with his grandfather, knowing that they had both shared, this painful legacy. So that is what I think about when I look at all of the war zones around the world, and right now that horrific one in Ukraine. All of the people who will just never be the same again, let alone, go back to their homes. But their lives have been shattered and everybody around them is going to be traumatized in a debilitating way in many cases. In many other cases, there'll be a new Nobel Peace Prize winner, but there will be many more disabled and traumatized people who will never recover.
So Paula, this experience inspired you to do this work in peace building that you've dedicated yourself to. And over the past 30 years, you've worked on some of the most challenging and bitter conflicts. And Nelson Mandela said, "It always seems impossible until it's done." What are some of the most important lessons you've learned that you feel are important for people to understand, that are essential for resolving conflict? What do we need to know? What are the most important things that you've taught people over these years?
First of all, do everything possible to prevent bloodshed, because even a little bit of bloodshed creates resentment and revenge, a desire for revenge for a long time to come. So prevention undoubtedly is important. Also, just, an awareness, an understanding by our leaders and by the people who lead because we allow them to, an understanding that war really doesn't even solve the original problem it's meant to solve. So it's not even pragmatic. What I've seen is that there might be a short-term, by one side or another, achievement of the goal, but not really. What you get instead of the results that you're looking for with these Stone Age methods, you get just many, many, many more problems to solve for years and generations to come. So it's always more pragmatic and more effective to keep talking and to not let the blood flow. Then you have a momentum that is hard to stop. And the longer it goes on, the longer the peacemaking will take. The other thing is, if war starts, if violence breaks out, whether we're talking about, a gang-ridden neighborhood with violence, or we're talking on this larger scale of war, our governments have no commitment to peace building and trauma healing that is funding it. When we compare the billions of dollars and other currencies spent on weapons, and then once the war is over, people like me and others who do the peace building work have literally a few $1,000s here and there to bring people together. And no funding or very little funding for trauma healing, which is also necessary if you're bringing people together in dialogue and people start having flashbacks during these discussions. They need therapy. We all need therapy who are in these war zones working on dialogue. So let's spend so much more on peace and so much more on healing. Those are my two takeaways. When I started working with my colleagues in a war that lasted about 1.5 years, and in terms of the scale of violence, I think it was minimal compared to what we're seeing right now in Ukraine or Iraq, Afghanistan. And yet here we are 30 years later. There's only a ceasefire. There's no peace agreement. And for a number of years, there was resumption of violence. The peace builders themselves played a big role in minimizing and finally getting rid of those resumption of violence. But traumatized people are still living in those war zones where none of the sides really got what they wanted. And I didn't think I would be here 30 years later looking at these situations and seeing how little we've accomplished. A lot given the resources we've had, but compared to what could have been done had the resources been there, it's minimal.
It's really important to hear your perspective on the funding that's so needed for post-war healing from trauma and peace building, and the just vast gap between what's spent on war versus peace, and imagining how different our world would be if we could spend that money on peace. So I want to go to my next question, which is, you lived in the former Soviet Union for 20 years. You have a
Moscow.
and grandchildren living in Russia today. The war in Ukraine is really personal for you and for your family. And as it goes on for the 3rd month, with no end on the horizon, what are you most concerned about, and what wisdom can you share from your peace building and what would be important, the most important things to secure a ceasefire and bring an end to the war? And what kind of post-war peace building you think is going to be necessary to prevent the conflict from erupting again? And finally, what difference do you think it would make if Ukrainian and Russian women were taking part in the negotiations?
Let me start with that last part, because every video I've seen of negotiations and names that have been provided about the negotiators indicate there's not one woman in the room, maybe one, I don't know, I can't say, but that you only see men talking. It's very flawed when you have that kind of situation. And so we need to have women talking. The women in our peace building world always we're more tuned into the costs of war and the costs of continuing war, or the costs of not making peace, because of our role as mothers, as nurturers. We just think and act differently, and maybe we're more creative in many ways in problem solving. I don't say as a rule. Well, I do say as a rule, but I wouldn't say 100%, because of course I've met many great men along the way who were great peacemakers and problem solvers. But when it's defense ministers who are at the negotiation table, and they're all men, there's not much hope I see in that kind of a dialogue, where only one group of interests is working. And in terms of what's going on now, as much as I try to keep up with it, I'm not clear right now how much, if any, talking is going on. Maybe it is going on behind the scenes, but it used to be that when it was Monday, you knew that the Ukrainians and Russians were talking, and I don't hear about that anymore. And I think, there has to be dialogue all the time. And we can't be saying, I won't talk to this person. We can't have our leaders say, I won't talk to that person because that person is this, that, or the other. No, we have to be willing to talk, because it's more likely when we're talking that we're not going to be shooting. And of course, this is a really personal war. For me, all wars are personal. I feel like a world citizen. This has a distinctively different feeling for me, because when I see the videos, I see places where I've been. I see people who I might have sat next to in my university class. I see soldiers who look like they could have gone to school with my sons in Moscow. It's hard to see that, brothers against brothers, people who used to be very well connected. And by the way, my son's last name is a Ukrainian last name, even though he was brought up in Russia and a Russian identity. And my other son is still there with one of my granddaughters and great grandson. So I'm worried about all of them. I'm worried about never being able to see that cemetery again, which is in Moscow, where I buried my father, my son, and his father, who asked to be buried there, who also was a victim of World War II and a survivor of trauma from that. So that's where I'm at.
Thanks for bringing the personal dimension to us in your heart. It really, the war is really personal, and as it is for everywhere in Mairead's family, the tragedy is always there. Just wrapping up with you, Paula, if you could talk about what your recommendations are, thinking about the participation of women, particularly in peace building, and why it's critical, but what people in general can do to start taking action for peace now. You've taught so many courses on this, and I know you have resources to share, which we're going to put in the chat, but if you could just maybe give us some things we can do right now.
Well, I would like to see a movement of war survivors, particularly led by women, war survivors around the world, who could just, make their voices, our voices loud, to call for a ceasefire and, really a tangible impact on the parties in this conflict. So I see this as a first step. And I know there's one last question. If this is the last question, then I will answer. Otherwise, if there's another round, I will say something else later. You know what? I'm going to talk about peace education, because I do think in the long term, the short term is we have to call for ceasefire. But one of the things I learned too late in my work in peace building, I began working with middle level opinion shapers 30 years ago. And now I wish I had spent more time then promoting peace education in the schools, because those children would now be leaders in their communities. So peace education, since peace work is a long-term activity that requires commitment and patience, it's not at all sexy. It looks very boring to outsiders. It's hard to even tell about it because the victories are so few and far between, and so sound not dramatic when you compare it to the drama of war. But that is what we really need to do to turn around this trajectory for peaceful problem solving, is make sure that peace literacy is as important as reading, writing, and arithmetic in our educational systems all the way through school and around the world.
Thank you so much, Paula. And we've put resources in the chat from you, and both you and Mairead have talked about the importance of peace education and starting with the youth. And because they will be in this position years from now, as you've said. So thank you. I'd like to now turn to welcome Ambassador Whyte, who's joining us. And Ambassador Whyte, we're so honored to have you with us here today too. And it's so good to see you again. And so welcome. And just a little bit about Ambassador Whyte. Ambassador Elaine Whyte Gomez is a diplomat and academic who previously served as the ambassador from Costa Rica to the United Nations in Geneva. In 2017, Ambassador Whyte presided over the UN conference that negotiated and adopted the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Facing extraordinary time pressure and sometimes contentious debate, Ambassador Whyte facilitated the adoption of this landmark treaty by a vote of 122 nations in favor, 1 against, and 1 abstention. Among her many accomplishments, she is also the first woman and the youngest person ever to serve as the Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs in Costa Rica. Welcome, Ambassador Whyte.
Thank you, Cynthia, and congratulations for the great work that you are devoted to, and devoted to the goal of peace, understanding, and I think this very moment is specifically a moment in which we'll have to move ourselves, just like many women did in between the wars and before the First War. So there is a great contribution to be made. Congratulations for your work.
Thank you, Ambassador Whyte. I'm humbled at those words coming from you. It's really, I wanted to really close with you as a panelist because you've worked on some things that are really, for me, like the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons at this time, a great ray of light and hope in this world. And you've really made such a difference with that. So I want to, and also, given that we've heard about your country being a country of peace, in 1948, 74 years ago, your President Jose Figueres Ferrer, abolished your country's military. And you've never had a standing army since. So what's it like for you? Share with us what it's like growing up in a country with no military and a country dedicated to peace. And how has this impacted your life, made you who you are? And how has it impacted the lives of the Costa Rican people?
Thank you, Cynthia, for starting with this question there, because it's there's nothing that moves more the Costa Rican society than this trait that we have, that we are an unarmed democracy, and that we accomplish our goals and struggles without the arms, without the fear of arms, weapons. Of course, it creates yet another challenge, because everything that we do as a society, we do by dialogue. And it does take patience, and it does take respect, and it does take, above all, it takes a lot of patience, because it is roads and journeys that we have to build through understanding and dialogue. So I have to say that the history of the well-being of my family is rooted precisely on the successful development policies that have been applied in Costa Rica for the country's development. Different generations of my family on both sides have been able to prosper and to become from rural population, impoverished rural population, to all of us becoming middle-class professionals living longer and healthier lives. And this has been the result precisely what we have been called peace dividends. When the army was abolished in 1948, and then this characteristic was also included in the new constitution that was drafted in 1949. This Costa Rican state had an opportunity to allocate the resources, the existing resources, in a different manner. And this is something I would like to point out, because when I was growing up, this has been the central message that we have heard, that we have been able to become a country with high levels of human development precisely because we were able to abolish the army and our resources go to health, to education. But when we commemorated the 70th anniversary of the abolition of the army, there was a group of economists that actually looked undertook an econometric study and did all this comparative analysis of our growth path. And it is absolutely true, and it was also demonstrated in studies that peace dividends are a reality, and that the Costa Rican society was able to, after living a short-lived civil war, and after having abolished the army, the resources or the expenditure in education tripled. In health, it also grew tremendously. The investment in infrastructure grew also in very significant manner. So those three investments, health, education, and infrastructure, created a completely different country 20 years later. And this is how we have been able to build a country that, as some say, is beyond our own limitations and dimension in terms of the human development that we have achieved, and in terms of the gravitation that we have in the international sphere. So for me, while I was growing up as a girl, it meant that for us, life was a life of opportunities, and also was a life without fear. We did not go through fear. We did not fear policemen walking down the street. We did not have fear. That is basically, I could elaborate a lot on that, but I think that phrase is very significant. I did not live or grow up with fear. But there is an aspect that also really created an important impact in myself as a young woman, which actually was the civil wars that took place in Central America, in our neighboring countries during the 80s. That I did see with fear, with concern, and especially when the civil war was taking place in Nicaragua. I had many friends that were fleeing from also from El Salvador. They were fleeing to Costa Rica to look for refuge. And so I had adolescents and just friends in high school that would tell me and they share with all of us their experience with war. And in this process, then part of what impacted me a lot while growing up, as I said, as a young woman, was the peace process that all the Central American nations undertook together. Let us recall that it was at the height of the Cold War, and that the superpowers had divided the world in areas of influence. And there was a lot of military proxy wars and military presence in those wars, civil wars. Each camp was supported by one of the superpowers. One of the most important aspects that is something that I still see with a lot of admiration was how the leaders of Central America, and together with many other leaders that were concerned about our fate, but they were able to very bravely say, we are going to negotiate peace. And let us recall this was not a war that was going on among states. It was within each country, and still they got together at the regional level and decided to end the civil wars and to end the conflict and to start a new process of development in democracy. And very importantly, they requested the superpowers to give this peace a chance to withdraw their military advisors, equipment, and to give the Central American peace and to actually support the Central American peace and to stop the military assistance to the different participants in the war. So that has been a truly strong impact in my life as I engaged later on in the field of international affairs and trying to promote cooperation, understanding among peoples.
Elaine, that was Dr. Ambassador Whyte. It was so inspiring to hear, that peace dividends are really a reality, and the impact, really the real impact on health, education, infrastructure, growing up without fear, not ever being afraid of a policeman. Just that is such an inspiration, and imagine for all of us growing up that way, what a difference it would make. And then to witness your neighboring countries coming together at a time of war and changing history that way. Thank you for that. So I'm going to move on to the next question, which is what it was like for you as a woman to lead the negotiations for the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and which bans nuclear weapons and makes them illegal for those who don't know. And what impact did the participation of women have on the ultimate journey of the TPNW and where it's how much success we've had with the treaty thus far? If you could talk about that, it'd be great.
Thank you also for bringing this up. When the treaty was adopted on July 7th of 2012, I felt the energy of giving birth, really. And although the call for abolition of nuclear weapons had been put to the world in the 40s for 70 years, and although the process of the humanitarian impact that led to the United Nations agreeing on a mandate to move the needle and give the international community a treaty that prohibits nuclear weapons. It is true that I did feel a great responsibility on my shoulders for the negotiation process. So when it came to an end with the adoption by such a solid expression of support by 122 nations, it really, as I said, made me experience and feel the energy of life, of giving birth, of life. And it was such an intense and challenging process that it took me some months before I could sit down and start reflecting upon the different dimensions of the negotiations that I had lived through. And one person came to me at that moment and asked me what role women had played in the negotiations. And I said, well, let me just reflect and go through all the process and try to identify the different moments, the processes, and where I saw women in each of them. And I have to tell you that women leadership was in every single aspect of the negotiation, whether it was at the formal leadership, the presidency of the conference, whether it was the representative of the Secretary General, Ms. Itsumi Nakamitsu, whether it was the leadership of the civil society, of the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, whether it was the voice and the leadership of the Ibakusha and of the victims of nuclear testing, whether it was in the negotiations of specific treaty provisions and in facilitating the negotiation of the most difficult components of the treaty. There you saw women exerting leadership and women facilitating negotiation with a cooperative approach and really making a difference, not only in the way in which all delegates approach the negotiations, but also I am very happy about having innovated in the way in which an international conference of this sort organizes its work so that we can innovate the way in which international negotiations are conducted. But let me say that another reflection, if we look at other processes, we have already heard today these wonderful life experiences of my predecessors. Also, I would like to bring here the contribution that women made to the process leading up to the Paris Agreement on climate change, and how we went from a conference in Copenhagen that didn't achieve the results to Paris, and what happened between those two conferences were conferences and processes leading by women, being led by women. So this is a sign of inspiration for all of women who are listening to us, that we do have a role to play, and that we don't have to think that there is one approach and one way in which leadership is exerted. There are many ways, and there is a variety of experiences of leadership that need to be put on the table.
This is so exciting and so exciting, and I'm so glad you brought the climate in as well. You know, that for these two existential threats, women have really played and are playing a key leading role in making it all happen. So that's really important for us all to hear and remember what's possible. It's just so inspiring to hear you say that it was like giving birth for you, and it was about life, because the treaty is not just about banning nuclear weapons, it's about affirming life. So it's very beautiful that you've shared that. So my next question is that as we move through the third month of the war in Ukraine, with the continuing risk of escalation to nuclear war, what are you most concerned about, and what lessons can we draw about nuclear weapons deterrence and international security in the 21st century? And what impact do you think this war will have in the future on the TPNW and the effort to abolish nuclear weapons?
Well, first of all, let me say that one of the first aspects that I would like to comment is how the war in Ukraine has been a wake-up call for humanity that has reminded us, that nuclear weapons do exist still with us, that we have thousands of nuclear weapons that are in a state of alert, that they can be put on a state of alert, and then they can be detonated by the decision of one leader. That is a very scary, this is a dangerous, very dangerous thought. And it's a very scary thought, but I think the first effect, the first impact of this war is to bring to our lives, to our present lives, that reality, because we had been concerned with other aspects in the past. So also an aspect that is fundamental in this reflection about the war is the danger of escalation, because when we are talking about escalating a conflict, the experts that analyze conflicts, and here Professor Garb is going to help us with that regard. The parties in a conflict might arrive when we are escalating at a moment in which one party only wants the other party to lose and to create as much damage and destruction as possible to the other party. But in that, as conflicts keep on escalating, there is a threshold in which even the self-preservation of one of the parties is blurred, because the parties want so badly to see the other party lose, or to generate as much damage as possible, that the instinct of self-preservation is somewhat lost, and that is when decisions are so risky and even might imply total annihilation of humanity. And this is why experts call this scenario moving into the abyss. Together into the abyss, because there is a point in which the parties do not see anymore other than the need for destruction. And this is when we have to listen to the voices of building a new security paradigm. Before we get there, because this is work in progress, we need to call for de-escalating this conflict so that we can create the conditions for going back to the table. And yes, it is true, we need women at the table, and we also need security perceptions. We also need to have the process of building security theories and approaches that take into consideration all of humanity, not only men, but also women, and that considers that security is not only a matter of the global north, that there is the global south, and that there are many experiences in the global south of how we have been able to build a sustainable peace by means of experimenting with institutional frameworks, mechanisms, promoting interdependence, promoting peace processes in all of the global south, and in many experiences also in the global north. There are many experiences of how we can build a new road towards security that is not only based on competition by the great powers, but also the great powers can build their own dialogue, their own process of building peace They're bringing together competition and cooperation, because it cannot be only built on competition. And this is where we need to move towards the 21st century, to bring the parties to understanding the interest of humanity in the self-preservation of life on planet Earth.
Thank you, Ambassador Whyte, for really helping us see a different kind of security for the future and redefining it for this time. So just to wrap up my questions for you, you've said that history is made by every single step we take every day. You've talked about the importance of women's leadership and participation, but can you talk a little bit about what we can do specifically as women, as people, to support the TPNW and its adoption and ratification by all countries, including the 9 nuclear armed states at this time, as we see what's happening with Ukraine and the new, as you said, wake up call awareness?
I would like to bring here also a reflection about the time frame that we need to address these huge problems of humanity. And my first message is not to lose hope and not to fall into despair, because we have a now, but we have a later. The fact that now we are in this very dangerous situation and that we have been seeing this wake-up call is not only a wake-up call for world leaders, it's a wake-up call for all citizens, all women, all citizens, that we need to raise our voices for the abolition of nuclear weapons. We are maybe some 20 years away from the 100th anniversary of the birth of the nuclear era, of the start of the nuclear terror. That is not too long. So 20 years, we have to think that in 20 years, when we arrive there, and I hope that I will arrive, also I will be here on this earth. What are we going to think about our journey of 100 years? And what are we going to do to think about what each of us as citizens did with this huge problem? We need to strengthen our call for the abolition of nuclear weapons, and in this regard, to call on for the signature and ratification of the treaty that prohibits nuclear weapons as a great contribution of the international community in this regard. So I would ask, first thing, let us recall that leadership has many expressions and takes many forms. It is not only formal leadership roles or authority roles that give women the opportunity to exert influence. We all have our own individual spheres of influence. So I would like to ask, what is your sphere of influence? Take stock of what it is that you do and with whom it is that you do and you work and you undertake all the work that you do in your life. And when you answer that question, you will realize that there is a space for personal influence that you can use to promote awareness in everybody that you know about the need to move towards nuclear abolition and to call on our leaders. The worst thing that we can do is to remain silent. We have a voice, and we have to use that voice to be as third parties, but interested parties, in all this conflict that we are seeing as part of humanity, to tell our leaders we need to de-escalate, we need to a negotiated solution, and we need to move towards a world free of nuclear weapons.
Thank you, Ambassador Whyte, for reminding us that we all have agency and to think about where our sphere of influence is. It's really something for all of us to take away from this today and where we can make a difference. I have a suggestion from a panelist to move directly to the Q&A. And so at this point, because we're late in the session and I want to give some time to answer some questions that have come in. So if that's okay with everyone, we're going to jump to the Q&A. And I got a question on email yesterday from Sue Greenway from the United Kingdom. Her question, which I'll read, is why is the West, namely the US and UK, arming Ukraine, spending billions of dollars when we have an escalating cost of living crisis, mostly here in the UK? How can we reestablish diplomacy re-Russia when Western governments act in a dumb stupor? The nuclear threat against the UK, I believe to be very real. Why can't the Minsk II agreement in full be implemented? I'd like to invite any one of the panelists to address this question or any aspect of it.
Maybe Cynthia, I can start.
Okay.
I think there is an overall concern because of the growing militarization of world politics. It is in the information that we have available now, how the only line of public expenditure that has not decreased, even with the pandemic, is military expenditure. Even in the year 2020, when GDP fell by 4%, military expenditure grew 2.3%. It has never stopped growing. So it is not a matter of one country or two countries. All the countries, especially the great powers, are spending a great deal, increasing their military expenditure. So there is a trend of militarization of our politics and this of the competition and weaponization of trade and trade development, everything, almost all components of international affairs are being weaponized at this moment. I would like to make reference though to the current situation in Ukraine, because we, for 75 years, that we have been living under the United Nations Charter that has created a rules-based order that has allowed all countries of the world to prosper in stability. Article 51 of the United Nations Charter establishes with Article 2 establishes a prohibition of the use of force and the prohibition of the threat of use of force. But if any country suffers an attack, an armed attack, that country is absolutely legitimated by international law to exert self-defense and to request other countries to come in its assistance to repel that armed attack. So this is also absolutely important, because if a country is invaded, that country has every right under international law to request assistance, to being helped in preserving its sovereignty. So this is something we have to keep into consideration. And this is most conflicts today are mediated, especially international conflicts are mediated. We need a group of nations that really can help the parties in the conflict to sit at the table and help them to achieve a good security arrangement. We cannot leave, there is an invasion to one country. We cannot leave that country alone. That is also something that we need to consider, because that's what international law has also included.
Thank you, Ambassador Whyte, for opening it up to what's at the UN and the law and explaining all of that to all of us. I think it's important for us to hear all of that right now. Mairead, would you, I know you would like to address this as well. You're muted. We can't hear you.
Usually the best way to keep me muted. You know, I have to ask the question, in Northern Ireland, when we said we can't solve this through militarism, we have to do it through negotiations and dialogue. And when our Good Friday Agreement was written up, there's actually a section in it which says that all parties to the conflict, the paramilitary groups, the local politicians, the British and the Irish government, all agreed that the problem would be tackled totally through negotiation, that we would not use violence to try to solve our political problems. And I'm very grateful for Mo Moland, the British minister who came over here and did so much to help the Good Friday Agreement and was party to that statement. We can't solve these problems through war, militarism, army, paramilitarism. We have to do it all-inclusive, unconditional talks around a table. Now that still stands in our Good Friday Agreement, and it's a wonderful statement. And I'm very conscious that the like of Tony Blair signed onto that, and the Irish government signed onto that. And I have to ask the question, how come when this conflict, dreadful conflict, blew up in Ukraine, how come that the British government went in the exact opposite way of sending arms into the Ukraine? And the arms are awash, and Ukraine will be destroyed because those arms are being picked up by many young people. And even when this thing is over, there will be, God help Ukraine, it'll be absolutely destroyed with fighting and arms. You know, they'll have a great job putting the top on this. So why didn't the British government and the Irish government and the American government, why didn't they use the same principle to solve the problem in Ukraine? And why did they give absolute support to the president of the Ukraine, who was asking for more and more and more and more weapons, and is still asking for more and more weapons, and would have stayed at the negotiating table to deal and bring in Minsk II, had not the Western supported him in his military madness. So if the Ukraine, when the Ukraine, and God help the people, as soon as they can de-escalate the situation, give peace a chance, give a space in the violence for cooling down the situation and solve the problem with some things that are already on the table, the Minsk agreement. So there is an answer, but until the like of the America and the British, two of the most military-minded countries in the world, they're militarists, let me tell you, until they become part of recognizing we are destroying this country by sending in all these weapons. And who's benefiting? Not the Ukrainian people, God help them, not the Russian people, but the arms manufacturer. If you look at the arms manufacturer in America, you can check it out on the website. Their ambition is to be full dominant spectrum of militarism for the world, and the elites, people behind the arms trade, are often senators and some congressmen making millions out of the arms industry, like Raytheon and people like that. So wars make money, but they don't make money for the poor. They kill the poor. They make money for the rich. So there is a way through this. There is a peace process for Ukraine. And the sooner they can get round the table and sort this out, the better, and it'll save their people dying on their streets. Ukrainian people are dying. Russian people are dying. They're paying the price of this madness of armchair generals who are sending in the guns so the last Ukrainian and Russian people can die. We have to call to account those who are feeding these wars and making money out of it, the arms manufacturers. It is so sad, because who's dying? The Ukrainian people. And, you know, the arms manufacturers and people at the top won't be the ones to go in to rebuild Ukraine and let the people have their homes back. Nor were they the ones who went in to build Iraq or Afghanistan or Libya or all those other countries after they destroyed them. You know, Yemen, the children are dying and they're so hungry. And yet, who's been benefiting out of this nonsense? Only the arms manufacturers. We have to stop this madness of war. We must abolish war. We must abolish militarism. We must find new ways of solving our human problems for the sake of our little children, wherever they live.
Mairead, thank you for calling for us to give peace a chance and reminding us who profits from war. Not the people, but the arms manufacturers are the ones, the only winners in war. So thank you, for the sake of the children, reminding us that we have to call for peace now. We are out of time, but I want to know if the panelists are able to stay for one more question maybe, and then we'll close up. Is that okay with everyone? Okay. So I have a question, which I think is, what should be the content of peace education as the risk of using nuclear weapons is at its highest level? And Paula, maybe you want to start by addressing that, and then brief closing words from everyone, and we'll wrap up.
We do have to look very carefully right now at getting back to nuclear arms control, complete control and prevention of development of nuclear weapons. Peace education is a long-term goal, and there's no real short-term advantage except in the local communities and in the families of those children. That's a good enough reason to start now. And the content of that peace education has to be that violence, first of all, doesn't get you what you're looking for. It gets you farther away from it. So it's just not a practical way to solve your problems. And learning that from a very early age is absolutely necessary. And one thing I tell myself every day about what I can do to make this a better world, and what everyone can do, is let's be kind to ourselves and to others, and let's forgive ourselves everything and forgive everyone else everything.
Beautiful, Paula. Thank you. Thank you. I want to say that we're putting resources in the chat for more information about getting involved in the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons and that information certainly can be included in peace education. That's part of what we can do to move build awareness to move towards the abolition of nuclear weapons. Ambassador Whyte and Mairead, would you like to give very short closing words to everyone?
I have just read the most beautiful book, and it's called Joy. And it's an interview with His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Tutu, both great peace activists. And you know, that book is full of love, full of respect for each other, full of just the joy of being alive. And I would recommend it to any young person who wants to see an example of great peace activists. God rest Tutu, he's no longer with us, but the Dalai Lama is a great leader and he speaks for peace, and it's just wonderful. Joy, be happy in your peacemaking. Take joy in it, and you know it's a good path to be on, to love and to respect others, and to listen, and you'll get the way.
Thank you, Mairead. Joy in peacemaking and love and respect for others and talking. Thank you so much. Ambassador Whyte, please, welcome you for closing words.
Thank you. Mairead was saying something that is fundamental in this process, is to remember our common humanity. And I would only add to that women that give life and have a responsibility. Don't think about war as something that is far away, and don't feel disenfranchised by the way in which the conflict and security issues have been handled, because what we are in need of for this humanity's 21st century is to be able to build these security arrangements, not only with the perspective of those who have built the security arrangements, who are men in the North. We need to have a more diverse, a more realistic way of building security arrangements that include the perspective of women and the perspective of other countries that also need security to live and thrive. So my call is to exert leadership. Don't think about leadership just as a formal position. Speak with your voice in your heart, and speak your voice now. We need people to speak and to raise their voices now for peace.
Ambassador Whyte, that's a perfect way for us to close, and we all need to raise our voices now for peace. I'm sorry we didn't get to all the questions. We had so much wisdom from our speakers, and I'm so grateful to you, speakers, for all the inspiring words that you shared, all of your wisdom, your insights, your experience. This is a gift we will take with us. And I want to thank Amel Zaroug for her wonderful Zoom operations management, and Colleen Moore for her wonderful social media gathering throughout our session, social media sharing throughout our gathering. And I want to thank all of you who have joined us from around the world today. And thank you so much for joining our call to peace now. All these women have inspired us. There's so many things we can do, so many ways we can make a difference. Let's heed their call to action and join them in building peace in our communities, countries, and world now, as they've all invited us to do. We're going to be gathering again, and with hope it will be with our Russian sisters. And that will be in the next few months or the fall at the latest. So we look forward to seeing you all again then. And again, thank you so much for being here and for all you do for peace, especially to our dear, beloved, amazing, extraordinary speakers. What a gift to be with you today. Thank you so much.